There is a moment inside every family when the smiling photographs stop telling the whole story, and for the Wales family, sources suggest that moment arrived quietly, long before the public ever knew something had shifted behind the walls of Windsor. What if the real story was never about Catherine's illness at all, but about a 9-year-old girl who was reportedly learning to carry grief no child should have to hold? Before we go further into what may have happened inside one of the most private chapters in modern royal history, hit that subscribe button so you never miss an update from Royal Legacy, where we go beyond the headlines to bring you the analysis nobody else is covering. Let's start with what we actually know, the parts that are not speculation, because the factual timeline matters here. In March 2024, Catherine, Princess of Wales, announced in a personal video message that she had begun preventative chemotherapy following a cancer diagnosis discovered after abdominal surgery earlier that year. That announcement itself came after months of public speculation, edited photographs, and online conspiracy theories about her whereabouts, a period the palace has acknowledged was uniquely difficult for the family. Catherine completed her course of chemotherapy by September 2024, and by January 2025, she confirmed she was in remission, though she has spoken publicly about the ongoing emotional and physical toll of the harder days, as she herself described them in later public appearances. These are the confirmed facts. Everything else, the private conversations, the emotional undercurrents, the alleged tension between family members, comes from sources close to the household, palace watchers, and reported accounts that have not been confirmed by Buckingham Palace or Kensington Palace. We want to be clear about that distinction as we walk through this, because what makes this story so compelling is not tabloid accusation. It's the quiet human question sitting underneath a family that the world has always seen as composed, controlled, and above all, private. So here's the angle most coverage missed. While the world focused on Catherine's health, the emotional story reportedly playing out inside Adelaide Cottage may have centered on Princess Charlotte. According to sources cited in later royal commentary, Charlotte allegedly experienced a noticeable shift in behavior during the months of her mother's treatment, becoming quieter, more withdrawn, and less willing to talk about her feelings compared to her usual outgoing nature. If true, that would not be surprising to any child psychologist. Charlotte was around 8 and 9 years old during this period, an age where children are old enough to sense that something serious is happening, but not always equipped with the language to process it. Unlike George, whose future role as heir places a different, arguably more insulated set of expectations on him, and unlike Louis, still young enough to be shielded from most of it, Charlotte reportedly occupied a strange middle position, old enough to understand, young enough to be left without an obvious outlet to talk about what she was feeling. Now here's where the story gets more complicated, because this is where the reported family dynamics start to come into focus, and it's worth pausing to ask why this angle barely made it into mainstream coverage at all. Multiple royal commentary channels and several unconfirmed insider accounts have suggested that a specific interaction involving Camilla, Queen Consort, and Charlotte became a flashpoint during this period. According to these reports, which again the palace has never confirmed or denied, a conversation between Camilla and Charlotte during a family gathering allegedly did not land the way it was intended. Sources suggest Charlotte came away from that exchange feeling criticized rather than comforted, at a moment when she was already, reportedly, absorbing more emotional weight than anyone around her realized. We want to be careful here, because we are not saying Camilla acted with any ill intent. Every account we've seen frames this as a miscommunication, not misconduct, the kind of moment that happens inside any family under pressure, magnified only because of who these particular people are and the scrutiny that follows them. But if this account holds any truth, it would explain a great deal about what reportedly followed. According to unverified accounts that have circulated among royal commentators, William is said to have addressed the situation directly, allegedly making clear to those closest to him that Charlotte's emotional needs during this period could not be treated as secondary to expectation or tradition. Whether that conversation happened exactly as described, whether it involved Camilla directly, or whether it was simply William setting new boundaries within his own household, remains unconfirmed. What is not speculation is that William has spoken publicly on multiple occasions about prioritizing his children's well-being over rigid royal convention. Greatness, a philosophy he has referenced in interviews as something he and Catherine deliberately built into their parenting, partly shaped by his own childhood experience of losing his mother in the public eye. And that detail is not incidental. It's arguably the key to understanding everything else in this story. William was 15 when Diana died. He has spoken about it sparingly, but pointedly over the years, describing how the public nature of his grief as a child shaped his determination to give his own children a different kind of childhood, one with more privacy, more emotional space, and fewer expectations placed on them before they're ready to carry them. If Charlotte really did struggle silently during her mother's illness, it would track directly with everything William has said about wanting to break a certain pattern of royal parenting, the pattern where composure was expected above almost everything else, where children were taught to perform stability, regardless of what was happening internally. Catherine, for her part, has been notably candid in the aftermath of her treatment about how illness affects an entire household, not just the patient. In her public remarks following her remission announcement, she spoke about how she had underestimated the psychological adjustment of finishing treatment, describing feelings that surprised her, even though she expected them intellectually. If Catherine has been that open about her own difficulty processing the emotional aftermath as an adult with full context and support, it stands to reason that a child in the house watching her mother go through something she could only partially understand may have needed more support navigating it than anyone initially accounted for. This is usually the point in the story where we tell you the confrontation, the big moment, the scene everyone is waiting for. But we're going to hold that a little longer, because to understand why this specific chapter of royal life matters, you have to understand what was already fragile inside the family before Catherine's diagnosis ever entered the picture. Let's talk about timing, because timing here is almost everything. Catherine's diagnosis came only weeks after King Charles himself announced he was undergoing treatment for cancer, discovered incidentally during a procedure for an enlarged prostate. Two of the most central figures in the modern monarchy, the reigning king and the future queen consort, both facing health crises within the same news cycle, while Prince Harry and Meghan remained estranged from the family following their departure from royal duties in 2020, and while King Charles's ongoing health situation raised quiet, uncomfortable questions in the press about succession planning that nobody in the family wanted to be having in public. Add to that the fact that William had, by early 2024, already been steadily taking on more of his father's public duties, effectively operating as a bridge between the current reign and the one that will eventually be his. That is an enormous structural weight to place on any man in his early 40s, let alone one simultaneously trying to support a wife through chemotherapy and parent 3 children through the quiet chaos of it all. Sources close to the household have suggested William privately scaled back several planned engagements during this period, specifically to be present at home more often, a claim broadly consistent with the reduced public schedule he kept throughout much of 2024, which is a matter of public record, even if the private reasoning behind specific decisions is not. So when we talk about a possible tension point involving Camilla, it's worth placing it inside that wider picture. This was not simply one difficult conversation between a grandmother figure and a granddaughter. If it happened the way sources have suggested, it happened inside a household already stretched thin by a king's illness, a princess's treatment, ongoing tension with the Sussexes, and a future king trying to hold every piece of it together while still parenting his kids day to day. Under that kind of pressure, even well-intentioned exchanges can land wrong. Even people who love each other can miscommunicate in ways that leave a lasting mark, particularly on a child who is already absorbing far more than the adults around her may have realized in the moment. This is also where we have to talk honestly about what royal family therapists and child psychologists who've commented publicly on royal parenting have said in general terms, without speaking about this specific family. Children of high-profile parents, particularly those facing public health crises, often develop what's sometimes called protective performance, the tendency to appear fine, specifically because they sense their parents are already overwhelmed and don't want to add to that burden. If that dynamic played out with Charlotte, and again, we want to stress this is informed speculation based on patterns, not confirmed fact, it would mean the quietest child in the room was potentially also carrying some of the heaviest weight, precisely because she didn't want to make things harder for her mother. Now let's return to what reportedly happened once William and Catherine became fully aware of the depth of what Charlotte may have been carrying. According to several accounts that have circulated in royal commentary spaces, the response inside the household was not a single dramatic confrontation, but a series of quieter recalibrations. Sources suggest William began being more intentional about carving out one-on-one time with each of his children individually during this period, a pattern that would align with broader reporting about how the Wales family has structured school terms and holiday time to prioritize routine and predictability, something child development experts consistently recommend for kids processing a parent's illness. Catherine, for her part, has spoken generally about the importance of what she calls the everyday moments, a phrase she's used publicly in relation to her early years foundation work, which focuses heavily on the emotional development of children under 5, but which she has also referenced in relation to her own parenting philosophy more broadly. If there was a recalibration involving Camilla specifically, and we want to reiterate that this remains unconfirmed by the palace, sources suggest it would have taken the form of William simply being clearer about boundaries going forward, rather than any kind of lasting rift. Royal commentators who track the relationship between the Wales family and Camilla have noted that public appearances since this period have shown no visible sign of ongoing tension, with Charlotte appearing alongside Camilla at various royal engagements, including trooping the colour and Christmas Day services in a manner that reads, at least publicly, as entirely normal. That, of course, doesn't rule out a private conversation ever having taken place. Royal families are, if nothing else, exceptionally skilled at maintaining public composure, regardless of what may be happening away from cameras. But it is worth noting, as we walk through this, that the public record shows a family that has, if anything, appeared more unified in its public appearances since 2024, not less. So where does that leave the emotional heart of this story? Perhaps the most telling detail, and one that is grounded in Catherine's own public words rather than second-hand sourcing, came during her remarks after completing treatment, when she spoke about wanting to use her experience to help other families going through similar situations, specifically referencing the impact of a parent's illness on children. She has not, to our knowledge, named Charlotte specifically in these remarks, and we want to be careful not to imply she has confirmed anything about her daughter's internal experience during this period. But the fact that Catherine chose to speak publicly, even in general terms, about how a parent's illness reshapes a child's world suggests she was, at minimum, deeply attentive to that dynamic within her own home, whatever the specifics of Charlotte's experience actually were. What makes this story worth sitting with isn't a scandal. There's no confirmed wrongdoing here, no villain, nothing that rises to the level of the tabloid framing some outlets have reached for. What makes it worth sitting with is the quieter, more universal question underneath it. What happens to the children in a family when the adults around them are fighting their own private battles, doing their absolute best, and still, inevitably, missing things? William has built much of his public identity around trying to answer that question differently than his own parents did. Catherine has spent the last 2 years, by her own account, learning that surviving an illness is not the same as fully processing it. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, according to accounts that remain unconfirmed but persistent, a young princess was reportedly learning the same lesson far too early, that sometimes the people who love you most are too deep in their own storm to see that you're caught in it too. Whether the specific details reported by royal insiders are entirely accurate, partially accurate, or embellished in the retelling, as these things often are, once they pass through enough hands, the broader pattern they point to is one that plenty of families, royal or otherwise, would recognize immediately. A crisis arrives, everyone focuses on the person who is sick, and only later, sometimes months later, does anyone notice that a child in the next room absorbed more of it than anyone realized at the time. So here's the question we'll leave you with, because this is a story that is still unfolding in real time, largely away from public view, in a household that has become notably more private since 2024 than it was in the years before. If William and Catherine really have restructured how they handle these moments going forward, what does that mean for how George and Louis are being raised as they grow older and inevitably face their own versions of public pressure? And if Charlotte's experience really was as significant as some sources suggest, will we ever actually hear about it from the family directly? Or will this remain one of those chapters of royal life that the public only ever understands in fragments, pieced together from sources, patterns, and the rare, careful sentence a princess chooses to say out loud, years after the moment has already passed? We'll be watching for whatever comes next, and we think you should be too.